Picture someone you know. Maybe it's a colleague, maybe a neighbor, maybe it's you. They got the promotion, finally. After years of grinding, the salary went from $60,000 to $95,000. That's a $35,000 raise, life-changing money by most measures. So here's the question. 3 years later, are they richer? You'd assume yes, obviously. The math is simple. Except it isn't. Because 3 years later, they're driving a car they couldn't have afforded before, living in a neighborhood they moved to because the old one didn't feel right anymore. Their kids are in a private school. The vacations got longer. The restaurants got nicer. The wardrobe got quieter but somehow more expensive. And if you sat them down and asked them how much they had saved in those 3 years, really saved, not the number on the paycheck stub, but the number building actual wealth, they'd shift in their seat. Because the answer for an embarrassingly large portion of high earners in this country is almost nothing. This is not a story about bad people making dumb choices. This is a story about a mechanism, a quiet, almost perfectly invisible financial force that grows alongside your income, shadows your raises, and systematically devours the gap between what you earn and what you keep. It has a name. Economists know it, psychologists have studied it for decades, but somewhere between the personal finance influencers telling you to cut your coffee and the investment banks selling you products, the real conversation never happens. It's called lifestyle inflation, and it is, without question, the single most effective wealth destruction machine ever built. Not because it's dramatic, because it isn't. Let's back up for a second. Because before we get into the mechanism, we need to understand why this is the right conversation to be having right now, in this particular moment in economic history. Over the last 20 years, personal finance content has exploded. There are more books, podcasts, YouTube channels, and Instagram accounts dedicated to money than at any point in human history. And the advice, by and large, is not wrong. Invest early. Diversify, avoid high-interest debt, max your retirement accounts. Fine, good, true. But here's what's strange. Despite all of that information, despite the fact that compound interest has been explained 10 million times on the internet, the median American household has less than $40,000 in retirement savings. And that's the median, meaning half the country has less than that. We are, as a society, more financially educated and more financially fragile than we have ever been simultaneously. Something is not adding up. And if you look closely at the data, not the headlines, the actual longitudinal studies, a pattern emerges. The problem isn't that people don't know about investing. It's that for a large majority of earners, the gap between income and investment never widens. It stays flat or it shrinks because spending grows in near perfect lockstep with income. That is lifestyle inflation, and it operates in a way that makes it almost impossible to detect from the inside. Here's how the mechanism works, and pay attention here because this is the part that's genuinely unsettling. When you're earning $40,000 a year, you have a certain baseline, a certain set of goods and experiences that feel normal. Your apartment, your car, the restaurants you go to, the clothes you wear. This is your reference point. Psychologists call it your consumption floor, the minimum standard of living you've anchored your identity to. Now you get a raise, let's say 20%. Suddenly, you have $8,000 a year in new income. What do you do with it? The rational answer, in the personal finance sense, is obvious. Save and invest the majority of it. Enjoy a little, invest the rest. Let compounding do its thing. But here's what actually happens and why. Your brain doesn't process a raise as surplus income. It processes it as a signal that your reference point should shift. The science on this is not ambiguous. Research in behavioral economics, particularly the work coming out of Princeton and the London School of Economics in the 2000s and 2010s, consistently shows that consumption tracks income with remarkable fidelity. When income goes up, spending follows, typically within 12 to 18 months. And the spending doesn't come in one dramatic purchase. It doesn't arrive as a yacht or a vacation home, decisions you'd consciously deliberate over. It seeps in.
A slightly nicer grocery store, a streaming service you added and forgot about, a gym membership at the better gym, a car lease that's only a little more per month, a neighborhood that requires a mortgage only a little above what you were comfortable with. None of these decisions individually is completely defensible, reasonable even. You can afford it, so why not? But here is the compounding effect in reverse. Every time you permanently raise your consumption floor, every time a new expense becomes part of your normal life, you've done something mathematically catastrophic that you can't see. You have not just spent that money. You have committed to spending it again next month and the month after, for years, possibly decades. That gym membership isn't $40. It's 40 times 12 months times 30 years. It's $14,400. The car lease that's just $300 more than your old payment is nearly $11,000 over a 3-year term. The nicer apartment that costs $600 more per month is $7,200 per year. None of these feel like big decisions. That's the entire point.
Let me give you a number that I want you to sit with. The average American receives roughly 8 to 12 significant income increases over the course of their career. Promotions, job changes, industry jumps. Between age 25 and 60, if your income grows at a reasonable clip, you might see your salary double, maybe triple. In theory, that should be transformative for your wealth. Now let's do the uncomfortable version of the math. If every income increase you ever receive is entirely consumed by a corresponding increase in your lifestyle, which again is what the data shows happens for the majority of earners, then your savings rate never changes, not in real terms. You might be putting more dollars into a 401k, but as a percentage of income, as a portion of the wealth you're capable of building, you're standing completely still. Meanwhile, the person who kept their lifestyle static after a raise or grew it modestly and invested the rest is not just saving more, they are compounding on a higher base. That gap between the lifestyle inflator and the lifestyle controller widens exponentially over time. Here's a concrete example. 2 people, same starting salary of $60,000, both get raises that take them to $90,000 over 10 years. Person A adjusts their lifestyle upward with every raise and saves a consistent 8% of income throughout. Person B keeps their lifestyle at roughly the $60,000 level and invests the difference. At a 7% annual return, by age 60, the gap between those 2 people is not the difference between comfortable and very comfortable. It is the difference between a retirement that is possible and one that is not. We're talking about a gap in many realistic scenarios of over $500,000, sometimes more, built entirely out of decisions that each felt completely reasonable in the moment they were made. Now here's the part that I find genuinely interesting, almost darkly funny if you can stomach it. The entire consumer economy, and I mean this structurally, not as a conspiracy, is architected to make lifestyle inflation not just easy, but feel like the responsible and appropriate response to earning more money. Think about what happens when your income goes up. Your bank knows, your credit card company definitely knows, your credit score probably improves, which means your borrowing limit goes up, which means the ceiling on what you can spend has been raised before you've had a chance to think about whether you should raise it. The real estate industry is particularly good at this. When you call a mortgage broker, they do not ask you how much you want to spend, they tell you how much you qualify for. That is a completely different question, delivering a completely different psychological anchor. If you qualify for a $700,000 home, the conversation subtly shifts to how you want to spend up to $700,000, not whether you should. Car dealerships have refined this to an art form. The conversation is never about price. It's about monthly payment. And when the monthly payment feels manageable, when it's only slightly more than what you are already paying, the actual total cost of the vehicle becomes an abstraction. This is not an accident. These industries have spent an extraordinary amount of money understanding consumer psychology, specifically to make the transaction feel smaller than it is. And layered on top of all of it, particularly in the last 15 years, is something that has accelerated lifestyle inflation to a pace that previous generations simply didn't face:
the permanent, ambient visibility of other people's consumption. Social media has done something genuinely novel to human psychology around money. For most of human history, your reference group, the people whose lifestyle influenced your sense of what was normal, was geographically limited. Your neighbors, your colleagues, people you actually knew. Now, your reference group is effectively infinite, and it is curated algorithmically to show you the most aspirational version of the lives people around you are living. Every vacation, every renovation, every restaurant, every car in the driveway. This is not about envy in some shallow sense. It's about what psychologists call social comparison theory. Humans are deeply evolutionarily wired to benchmark their status against the people around them. It helped our ancestors survive. In the modern consumer economy, it mostly helps brands sell products. The result is a reference point that is constantly, subtly inflating. What felt like enough last year feels a little less like enough this year. Not because your needs changed, because your comparison set did. Here is where I want to zoom out, because up to this point, we've been talking about individuals. But lifestyle inflation is not just a personal finance problem. It is, in aggregate, one of the primary reasons that wealth inequality in developed economies has become so geometrically extreme. The people at the top of the income distribution, and particularly those who inherit wealth rather than earn it, often have a different relationship with consumption. Not necessarily because they're more virtuous, because they don't need to spend more to signal status. Their status is structural, embedded in ownership of assets that generate income without requiring labor. While the middle to upper middle earner, the doctor, the lawyer, the senior engineer, is running a consumption race they cannot win. The asset class above them is compounding quietly. Real estate portfolios, equity stakes, private investments, things that don't require you to upgrade your lifestyle to demonstrate that they exist. This is the quiet irony at the center of the wealth gap. The high earner, by most visible measures, looks rich. The actually wealthy, by most visible measures, can look almost unremarkable. Because their wealth doesn't live in what they consume, it lives in what they own and what that ownership produces. The person earning $200,000 a year and spending $190,000 of it is, by almost any meaningful financial measure, less secure than the person earning $80,000 and spending $50,000, investing the rest into assets that grow independent of their labor. Income is not wealth. This is not a complicated idea, but lifestyle inflation makes it very, very easy to confuse one for the other. Because when your lifestyle matches your income, the feeling of financial security and actual financial security become indistinguishable, right up until the moment they aren't. The job disappears, the medical emergency arrives, the market turns, and the person who looked financially comfortable for 20 years suddenly has almost nothing to cushion the fall. So what's the answer? I'm going to disappoint you slightly here, because the honest answer is more interesting than the typical prescription and also more unsettling. The standard advice, budget harder, save a fixed percentage, automate your investments, is not wrong. It's useful. Do it. But it doesn't address the root of the problem, which is not informational. It's psychological, it's social, and it's structural. You cannot simply decide to ignore your reference group. That's not how social comparison works. You cannot opt out of the consumer messaging that surrounds every income increase you receive. You cannot make the friction of spending higher by willpower alone. What you can do, and what the research consistently shows works better than budgeting, is change the environment before the money arrives. Automatic investment contributions that move before you see the paycheck. Intentional decisions about what your lifestyle is before a raise, not after. Hard conversations about what your consumption is actually optimizing for. Because here is the question that I think is worth sitting with, and that doesn't have a clean answer. We spend most of our lives optimizing for a lifestyle. A certain apartment, a certain car, a certain set of experiences that we tell ourselves represent the good life. And we pour enormous energy, our labor, our time, our youth, into generating the income to sustain that lifestyle. But almost nobody stops to ask whether the lifestyle they're inflating toward was a choice they actually made, or whether it was assembled piece by comparison and suggestion and the constant ambient pressure of a market that profits enormously from your desire to feel like you're doing as well as the person next to you. The wealthiest people in the world do not, by and large, compete on lifestyle. They compete on ownership, on assets, on things that generate returns whether they're working or not. The rest of us compete on consumption, and in that competition, there is no finish line. The comparison set always has someone newer, shinier, more comfortable, one step ahead. Which raises an uncomfortable possibility, one that nobody in the financial industry has much incentive to say clearly. Maybe the race itself is the problem. Maybe the single most radical financial act available to most people isn't a better investment strategy or a smarter budget. Maybe it's simply deciding what enough looks like before the market decides for you.